Hi everybody, my name is Santhosh. So I have about 8 years of software development experience, and for the past 3 years I've been working on AngularJS, developing single page applications. So the server-side stack that I commonly use is Java and Python and PHP sometimes. Not a lot of .NET though. So naturally this is how I feel coming here to a .NET meetup, but I'm going to try to focus on the JavaScript part of the things today, specifically AngularJS. So start with the grumpy cat saying JavaScript is not funny, but really JavaScript is actually a fun language to work with. And today specifically we are going to look at single page applications. So a typical web application consists of your server side and your client side. Your client side is the pages that load on your browser, and your server side is where you have your programming logic, which does stuff like inserting data into your database, like when you create a user, when you register an account, your user record gets inserted into the database. So typically these sort of things occurs on the server, and then the form where you enter your data, that's your client side. So typically a web application consists of multiple controllers, views, and models. That's what a MVC web application is. Now, what happens is each time you click submit, a request goes from your browser to the server, and then your server sends a data and some view back to the browser. So this is called a synchronous request. In general, this has been the way the web applications have been developed for the past decade. But then, for the past 3 years, there has been a lot of movement in the single page application architecture. So what is single page application and how does it differ? So this is what Wiki defines single page applications as. It is a website that fits on a single web page with the goal of providing a more fluid user experience. As in, you don't get to do a lot of synchronous requests, because when you do a synchronous request, the user kind of waits on the request to go back to your server, fetch the data and the view, and then bring it back to the client. So naturally, it's going to take a lot of time for the server to process this information and then send the whole view back. And sometimes it's not even sending you a new view; it's only a part of the view. So that's why the single page application differs in the approach, where you load all your views together at the first. When your web application loads the first time, your entire application loads, and then the server just deals with the data. So that is what a single page application is. Now, what are the advantages of using a single page application? Separation of concerns. As in, your controller, that is your server side code, and your front end code is completely separated, which means if you are working in a large application, your server side teams can focus on their own tasks, and your front end team, which consists of your UI people, your UX designers, they can focus completely on the front end side of things, and they hardly have to interact with each other unless there is an integration that needs to be done. So this saves you a lot of headache. If you have worked in a huge conventional web application, you would have definitely come across these issues one time or another. And another major important impact is, you can switch your server side anytime. Like most of the times, as I will be showing you, with a single page application, you will be dealing with JSON data, wherein your view gets loaded at the first call, and then your data interaction between your client and your server will happen through JSON. So at any point of time, you can completely replace your server side. Like you may start with PHP. Let's say you're starting a new project. You want to prototype something really fast, and you don't want to get into the hassles of build and deployment using a .NET server. So you can choose something quick. Like there are a lot of REST-based applications, REST-based frameworks out there, like Ruby on Rails. So you can take one and prototype something immediately. But then when you're going for a bigger application where you have to be concerned with load, scalability, things like that, then you can switch your server side instantly without even touching your front-end code, which is a really good approach when it comes to single-page applications. And specifically to AngularJS, since that is the focus of the presentation, two most important things comes into mind. One is routing. Whenever there is a single-page application, the single-page applications have been developed for a long time now, but one major issue is the URL routing. like when you type something on your address bar and then it goes to a specific page, that was not possible earlier, like 3 or 4 years before. It was very hard to achieve on a single page application. But AngularJS makes it a breeze. So naturally, your search engine friendly URLs or any URL based optimization that you need, it is a breeze with AngularJS. And another thing is the DOM binding. If you have used jQuery or any other JavaScript library, you would have come across a lot of DOM manipulations where you constantly interact with your DOM and change some stuff. So AngularJS again comes into rescue, and it provides easy DOM binding, as we will see in a moment. And you eliminate a lot of spaghetti code back and front. Now, this is a small comparison between the conventional MVC application and the single page application. So we already covered the routing, but in general, the routing is usually handled on the server side, but in a single page app, your routing is handled on the front end. Similarly, your views. For .NET folks, you could have used MVC3 or MVC4. You would always have a C# page which loads, and you do a lot of server-side handling on your front end. So all that would be eliminated because you'll be dealing with plain HTML pages. None of your server-side code would be part of your front-end code. Similarly, the business logic. When it comes to Spark, you would prefer to write most of your business logic on your front end because that's one of the primary advantages of using a Spark. So let's talk a bit about project structure. I'm going to show you a couple of ways in which you can start with a Spark application. So the first method is you could load your first page as part of your existing server-side code. Like, let me show you, I have a PHP example. Sadly, I don't do a lot of .NET. So I'm just going to show you a quick example. So as you can see here, it doesn't matter about the syntax of the code, but I just wanted, is the code visible all the way to the back?
Yeah, can we make it a bit bigger?
I'm getting a little old.
That should be good.
Okay.
If I can see it, everybody should
So
see it.
as you can see, what I'm doing is on the flash, as you can know, is the root URL. So when the page first loads, I'm loading a single view called Spark, which is going to contain all the JavaScript libraries, the JavaScript references, and from then on, any URL, any segment that you want to load, it will be handled by the AngularJS application. So I'm going to show you the Spark code. So all I'm doing is when the server first hits the page, I'm loading the front end code, which is going to contain references to all my AngularJS code, the complete AngularJS application. So as you can see, these are all the references to my AngularJS application. So when this loads, the control automatically goes to my Angular application. And from then on, any URL that I visit within this application, it will be handled directly by the AngularJS app. So that is one way of doing it. The other way is you can completely isolate this. So here, as you can see, the primary handler is the server-side handler. I'm handling the first request on the server side, but then the subsequent requests are being handled on the client side. Whereas you can completely eliminate the server side, you can just deal with the front-end application and then call the server side as an API directly. So that is also possible. Yes.
I hate to interrupt. Am I to understand that the Angular waits for all the dependency? I'm going in and literally just trying it out. In jQuery, I have to load the other stuff in the DOM and then load my jQuery at the end. Am I to understand that this just waits for all the Angular to load and then does its thing?
Exactly. So it needs the you have the Angular library, which is the it's like almost 500 KB file. So once that file loads, you're free to do all your Angular application logic. So it's similar to loading jQuery. All you need to do is reference it, like as you can see here. I'm loading the Angular.js file here, and after the file loads, your application's execution.
But it waits for all the dependencies to run beforehand, or like jQuery, I'll have things that didn't load in order.
No, here you wouldn't have that issue because as you can see here, this is called a directive, which I'll be covering shortly. So what happens is, you build a module and you attach the module to your entire application. So as you can see here, I'm attaching my the ng app is a directive, which takes the name of the application that is created. So once the application initializes, there is, even for this to initialize, the file has to load. So right after it loads, it starts executing the digest cycle to load the rest of the application's code. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, thank you, I appreciate that. Sorry, the interruption.
No problem. So let me show you how this works in real time. So what I'm doing here is the first view that you're looking here. This is handled on the server side as I showed you. So I'm just going to handle the authentication on the server side, and as soon as the authentication completes, it's going to load the path. So this right here. So as you can see, the very first time when the page loads, it loads all the references that I have referenced in the part of PHP file. And then any subsequent operations that I do here, like going to a different page, you can see that the URL consists of a hash here, which means all these views are already loaded on the front end, and all these requests for going to a different view are being handled on the client side. Only when we deal with data, that is when the application needs to get new data or to create new data, that's when the client side application makes a API call and then create the data on the server side.
Got one question for you. Will you be covering what you just did there with the authentication, how you authenticate server side, and then?
Yes, we'll be covering it next. So I spoke about the project structure because a lot of Angular developers, when they start new, especially people who used to work in conventional MVC applications, they have this question about where to start or which approach to follow. So that's why it's sort of important to know that it's really up to you. If you want to load it from within your existing server side, you can very well do that. Or if you want to make it a completely isolated application, you're free to do that as well. So you'll have to decide that based on your specific use case. Now, what happens with depending on the method you choose, these are the things that are going to be impacted. The authentication and authorization workflow. If you load your application like I did from within a server side, then you can use your existing server side authentication, because like if you take .NET, if you have a session-based authentication workflow already, you can very well use that, just like you would do with a jQuery-based application. But if you are going for an isolated application, then you need to use a different form of authentication for that. So normally I use JSON Web Tokens, which I'll show you in a bit. The other one is the request handling, like I showed you. If you are loading your application from within the server side, the first request can be handled on the server side, the subsequent request can be handled on the client side. Whereas if it is a completely isolated path, then all your requests will be handled directly on the client side. So those are the things that will get impacted based on the method you choose. So the next thing is data binding and front operations, because this is the most important thing that you do on a web application. You create, update, and read data, and then you bind the data to the view. So we will look at some short code samples on how that is done using Angular. So let's take the dashboard that we just saw for example. Alright, so we have these components here, right? Like this shows the number of clients, the jobs, hours worked, and the employees here. Now, how is this data being loaded here? The first time when the application loads, it makes a call, a REST API call to a server-side API endpoint. And the server-side API endpoint returns a response to it. So the endpoint call that we are making I'm not sure if you can see this, but if you can you can see, this is the request that we are making. As you can see, it's I'm calling API/v1/user/dashboard. So for that request, the server has responded with a list of JSON data. So it gives me the total number of documents, the recent jobs, and now that you've looked at the JSON response that we're getting, let's see how that is being binded on the client.
When you go back to the browser, can you zoom in on the?
Oh, sure, right.
A little bit more. All right, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, sure. So this is all you need. All I'm doing here is, getting the data and then inserting it into a double curly braces. This is called string interpolation in AngularJS. What is happening here is,
Is all this already in the DOM?
yes, this is all already loaded in the DOM. The whole,
Ahead of time?
yes, ahead of time. The very first time when the page loads, the whole, all your view components gets loaded into the DOM.
That says on dashboard, total clients, and that's with the data. Can you show what JSON is in there?
Sure. Can you just give me 1 second? Let me. Okay. All right.
Is this like a think tank or a school, or what is this place? Is
It's
this?
definitely a think tank, because we're all applying.
I haven't figured out if it's
Yeah,
like a.
Iron Yard is a type of school, and then they host meetups and other events after hours to probably generate more people coming to the school.
Makes sense to me. I didn't understand what this was.
So where do you find the word dashboard?
The what?
Where do you find, it says the result is dashboard, where do you find that?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm going to show you. So the whole view is managed by this controller that we have here. The dot controller method is an Angular method that will allow you to create a controller. So you create a controller, and then user is a factory, which will let you make an API call to a server-side API. So all I'm doing here is getting the data, as you saw there, and then I'm binding it to a scope variable called dashboard. Now, in the back, behind the scenes, Angular is doing a little bit of magic to inject the scope in your controller. So Angular uses a concept called dependency injection. As you can see here, all I'm doing is passing $scope as an argument to this function, and then behind the scenes, Angular will automatically inject the $scope variable for you. And anything that you bind to $scope will be available to you in the view that is controlled by the controller. So as you can see, this is the dashboard controller, which manages the dashboard.html view, right? And then since you are binding the data into dashboard in the scope, you get all the data that is retrieved. So here you see documents, recent docs, recent jobs, total clients, total employees. So all these JSON keys that you retrieve from the server side, it is now available to you in the view.
Is all the injection done natively, or could you use third-party things like inject?
Angular has its own $inject service. For most use cases, you wouldn't need to override it because it does a pretty good job of injecting all the services that you want. Because as you can see, all you need to do is load your dependencies, pass your dependencies as an argument to the function, and it takes care of injecting the services by itself. So you wouldn't really need to override the default injection service.
But can you?
I've never done that, but I would assume it should be possible because the code is completely open source, so you're free to fiddle with it as you want. So this is called data binding. As you can see, you did not interact with the DOM directly. If this is done in jQuery, then you would have done something like you would have inserted an ID for this span, and then you would have done something like document.getElement by ID, and then you would have manipulated the DOM. But all those things are not required in AngularJS, which makes it one of the most powerful features in AngularJS. And similarly, the other part that we are seeing here is CRUD operation. As you can see, I was able to easily read the data. All I did is just this user.get dashboard. Let's look at the user function in a bit. So as you can see here, I've defined a factory called user. And within the user factory, I've passed the dependencies, which are $HTTP, a variable called API URL, and a variable called $local storage. So these are all available as part of the AngularJS service. So all I'm doing is passing it as dependencies. Now this $HTTP service that you're looking here, you can compare that to $AJAX service, which comes as part of jQuery. So it's very similar. It lets you make API calls to your server. So as you can see, I'm creating a service with the method post, and then I can pass an URL and the payload data that needs to be sent to the server, and then this returns a promise. So the promise allows, once you get the promise, you can write a success callback on that, an error callback on that, and then you can handle the data as you see fit. So that's all I'm doing here.
What's a promise?
Okay. So promise is a concept in JavaScript. What happens is when you make an asynchronous call, what you get in return, that is what is called as a promise. Because the concept behind that is, when you make an asynchronous call, you wouldn't know what's going to happen. The call might go through, the server might reject the call, the server might accept it, but then respond with the data that you are not expecting. So anything might happen. But something is going to happen, right? You're going to get something in return. So that is what is called as a promise. And the concept in itself is fairly large. You can do a lot of stuff with promises. There's a whole library dedicated to dealing with promises. It's called the Q library. You can check that out. It's a really interesting library. And AngularJS internally uses a partial version of the Q library called $Q for dealing with the promises on its own lifecycle. But it's a really good, interesting topic.
Can you interrupt? Does the promise asynchronously in real time update the DOM and the GUI like Knockout does?
Like the promise is what you get in return, right? Look, for instance, let's take this. So I have a function called getDashboard, and as you can see here, I'm making a server-side call to user/dashboard. Now this call goes to the server. I'm returning whatever $HTTP.get returns. I'm returning it back to the service, to the method that is calling, right? So this is a promise. Now, if you look at what I'm doing with the promise, so as you can see, this is how I'm dealing with the promise. I'm attaching a method called success on the promise, and within the success callback, I'm manipulating the DOM. So once you get the promise, you are free to do whatever you want with it. You can update the DOM, you can make another asynchronous request, pretty much whatever you want to do. But a promise in itself just lets you deal with the data that is returned from the server. What you do with the data or how you respond after that, that's completely different for you. So here, once I get the promise, I'm attaching a success callback to it. So success is again a convenient callback that Angular provides, and it's a call. So I'm passing in a callback function to deal with the data and then bind it to the scope variable. So that's how I'm getting all those functions without doing any sort of DOM manipulation. That is why I'm able to get all these things over here. As you can see, all the data that I'm wrapping inside the curly braces, these are the ones that are coming from the server. And you're not doing anything. Angular is doing everything for you behind the scenes. That is, this concept is called strict interpolation.
If you guys are familiar with jQuery and jQuery's AJAX, jQuery returns a deferred, Angular returns a promise. It's the same concept, just a different implementation. So it's the exact same thing as a deferred.
If the view model is updated, does it update the browser GUI in real time?
Yeah, that's handled by what he's talking about with the string interpolation.
Because normally I have to like knockout, because normally I have to like.
Yeah, the
jQuery-
observable.
Yeah.
Yeah, Angular handles it with a digest cycle, which he'll maybe talk about.
Alright.
But it's the same kind of thing.
So it's real, it just goes.
Yeah.
So yeah, let me talk about the data cycle for a second here. So how is this possible? So we saw that there's three distinct pieces here. First, you're making a call to the server, you're getting it in your controller, and then you're binding it to a scope variable in your controller, which in turn updates the GUI here. And you're not dealing with the GUI directly. This is possible because behind the scenes, Angular runs what is called as a digest cycle. Now, you can think of digest cycle as sort of like an infinite loop, which keeps on running throughout the life cycle of your application. And anytime you have something within your double curly braces, or there's a lot of things that we can see. But just think about this for a minute here. When you have this, Angular internally it updates a watch to this variable. So every time the digest cycle runs, it will look at the current value and it will look at the new value, and it will see if there's a difference. Then it will automatically update the GUI for you. That is called data binding. So Angular does this automatically for you.
Is the digest cycle runs on a specific interval, or something fires?
Digest cycle runs on a regular interval. It's sort of like a loop which keeps on running whenever some event occurs. But you can also invoke the digest cycle. Like for instance, if you are dealing with a third-party library, which Angular has no knowledge about, and you are using the third-party library to update some code, and you want those changes to be known in the Angular lifecycle, then there's a method called $apply, which if you invoke, it will run the digest cycle again. But you shouldn't directly invoke the digest cycle. You should use the apply method, which will run the digest cycle for you. So we saw data binding and CRUD operations. So let's see how the authentication is being handled. Now we saw, as I told you on the server side, if you are using any scheme, you can just completely keep using your server-side scheme, and then you can use the server-side authentication and authorization to manage what data you send back, and you can use the session and everything. But most people would like to isolate the application, because that is where the real power of Angular lies, right? So when you do that, how do you do authentication and authorization? One common method that I've been using is a mechanism called JSON Web Tokens. So what is JSON Web Tokens? It's a token that is created on the server side, which is then passed back to you, and every subsequent call, every REST API call that you make from that point onward, you attach it to the authorization header on each of your REST calls that would then be passed on to your server, and you can authenticate it on the server side. Let me show you how that works in real time. So I have a function here called auth server, and what I do here is I make a API call to a server-side API to create a token. And the JSON Web Token has libraries for .NET, Python, Ruby, PHP, or almost any language that you want. There is a specific library that you can use, and you can create the tokens over there. We're not going to look at the server side of things. On the client side, all you need to do is make sure you have a server-side API that returns the token that is created, and then you save it on your local storage, so that there is a concept called interceptor in AngularJS. Anytime you do something, if it's a routine action that you want to repeat, then you can use an interceptor to modify it automatically. So as you can see here, I'm using a interceptor called token injector. So what it's going to do is, anytime I'm going to make a REST API call, I'm going to intercept that request, and I'm going to append a token called JWT space the token as an authorization header. So once I pass this, the server side can then deal with this token however it wants to deal with it. So this is a very clean approach. If you use in your application, it saves you a lot of headache. You don't have to deal with individual requests. You just do it once, and in here you can also make exceptions. Like for instance, if for certain requests you don't want to pass the authorization header, you can do that. So you can do all sorts of things here. But basically, you can use these interceptors to effectively implement your authentication mechanism. And if you want to do it on the view level, that is also possible. So let me show you how that's done. Okay. So this is the little bit of authentication logic that I have here. So what I tend to generally do is I write the authentication code in a function that is run every time when the app starts. So I write it in a controller called app controller, which I then append to the primary applications module. So as you can see here, anytime a view changes, there is a state change event that is being created. So I listen on the state change event, and then I check for the a parameter which is appended to each of the routes. So anytime I intercept these routes, I will know which user is authorized to look at which views. So like as you can see here, it's a pretty simple logic. All I'm doing is, if it's an account-based user, then I'm allowing some access permissions here. But if it's a client, then I'm allowing only certain set of permissions. So all this you can write in one place, which will listen for the state change event and then fire it accordingly. So again, this is a very clean approach of maintaining all your states. So I'll come to the state management in a bit, but since we're talking about authentication, it's very easy to handle it using AngularJS.
So is that in the JavaScript right there?
Yes, this is JavaScript.
Well, what if someone puts a breakpoint in there and you change where the statement goes?
Of course, you'll have to handle the same thing in your server side as well, because still your data is being returned from the server, right? So this is just a precaution to make sure, because for most users, you're just contented with making sure the right views load. And again, the same set of user-based authorizations will also have to be implemented on your server side before the server actually sends down the data. Another most important aspect of AngularJS is directives. So far we've seen some of these directives. AngularJS has built-in directives which lets you do certain things. Like for instance, let's look at one of the directives. So ng-repeat is one of the commonly used directives. So it's sort of like a for loop. When you have a list of elements that you want to iterate on your view, then you can use ng-repeat and bind the data to a particular view within your DOM. And there's another directive called ng-show. So these are some of the things that's built into AngularJS. But really, the power of directives comes from the fact that AngularJS lets you create your own directive. So I'm going to show you one example of how a directive can be created. So this is a directive that I commonly use. It's a directive that lets you do full screen. So what happens is let's say there is a common piece of functionality that repeats across your application. Now commonly you will try to come up with a component like on your server side and then use the include to use the same file in all the places. But there's a neater way of doing that using AngularJS. So that's where directives comes in. there could be a whole complete presentation just to discuss and talk about the various things that you can do with the directive, but I'm just going to give the gist of it. So basically, you write something, and any DOM manipulation, like anything to do with handling mouse events or animation or sort of like making a carousel. So anytime you want to deal how your DOM looks, how it's going to change, then you write a custom directive. And you write the actual manipulation code in a function called link, and then you have 3 options on how the directive can be loaded. It could be an attribute, it could be an element, or it could be a class. So the most common way people use the directives is to use it as an attribute. So because that way it will be compatible with all the browsers. So Angular comes with a default route mechanism that you can use off the top, but there is a more powerful library which is Angular UI router. Angular UI router lets you deal with states instead of individual locations. So let me show you how the router configuration works. So we saw how we load the spa.php at first, right? So like I told you, the first page loads. And then as you can see here, I've defined a state provider and I've defined certain groups. You can look at the URL segments here, /dashboard, /company, /client. So all the view segments are being handled completely on the client side. Now this is a very powerful mechanism because you can nest multiple states in each of these states, and you can specify which controller is going to deal with these states, and which template is going to be loaded for each of these states, and you can also load 2 or 3 different views or multiple views on one single state. So it's a very powerful concept when you're dealing with a huge complex application with multiple inner segments. This really comes handy when you do things like that. And so this is what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about the authentication. I can just define the if a user is admin, then a particular view can be allowed to be seen by that user. So all the information, the role information or any other additional parameter, I can just specify and attach to the state, and I can then use it wherever I want. So I would advise anybody using AngularJS to go with Angular UI router, which is a third-party library that you need to additionally load in addition to your Angular library. So again, for file upload, there is a library called ng file upload and Angular file upload. It's a very easy mechanism to use. All it takes is just 2 or 3. I included this because file upload is a common part of many of the applications, and it's also one of the when it comes to dealing with client-side file uploads, you need to deal with the progress bar, and because everybody needs a progress bar these days. So all these routine mundane tasks you can easily handle with these libraries. I have a quote, but okay, I think we can skip that. Does anybody need to see the Angular file upload code?
Will this be posted online?
Sure.
This is Angular 1.
Yes, this is Angular 1.8. Lazy loading components. As you saw in the spa.php, we have so many files, and somebody asked a question about, is it good, in what order the files are going to be loaded. So in general, all you need is the base AngularJS library, and then you can pretty much lazy load all the components. So let me show you an example of how that happens. So as you can see here, all the third-party dependencies that I use in my application, I just lazy load it. The advantage is that because you are already creating a client-heavy application, you have too many JavaScript files, but that is going to take a lot of huge footprint. So you don't want, but not every time are you going to use all these files in your first load. So if it's like a library that you are going to need in the subsequent loads, then you can easily lazy load them. There's a library that you can use. and it's called OC lazy load. And if you use that, you can just define the component, and it will not be loaded on the first call. When your AngularJS is injecting the service, as I shown you, the AngularJS uses dependency injection, right? So when you ask for that particular service, AngularJS talks to the lazy load service, loads the dependency file first, and then injects the dependency on your controller or your factory or wherever you need. So that's a very cool way of dealing with huge applications when you have too many files to load. But performance is also important.
Where you show us how you do it, how you do it.
Right. So this is pretty much it. I don't have to. I'm not. I'm sorry.
There's no dot resolves or anything. How do you do it? I've done some Angular. Where is the dot resolve? There's things missing.
No,
Now
I'm just showing you the place where you load your dependency. So when you, in this example, in the sample application, I'm not using any of these. So I'm not using any of these dependencies. But when you really need to use these dependencies, you can load them in your controller and
So you don't have an example to show you how to do the
No,
lazy load?
on using them in the controller, I don't have the
How do you
example.
define which dependency is needed?
Yeah, I don't have that example code right now.
All right.
What he's saying is, so, like, moment there, right? That is setting up the dependency injection. This is just like if you do a Angular controller and you give it a name and then you give it a value. Same thing here. So you would go into you define a new controller,
Right.
and you would say that this controller needs moment.
Right.
That's going to look here where it's bound into the dependency injection. That's what this plugin is doing.
Oh, so
And then it's gonna see-
it
it's gonna
does,
see-
it does it for you.
Yeah, it's going to see the path, and then Angular is going to call out to the server to get bower component / moment
What is
moment
this
JS.
thing called?
Pull it in. What?
What is this called?
What's the name of the component?
There's a library called OC lazy
Because it's
load,
normally
but I
done
think
the
they were
routing
talking
and it's
about.
got a resolve on it, you pass like a function to it,
Right.
there's a way to do it. That's the way you normally.
Yeah, this
do
is
lazy load.
loaded like an Angular HTML template.
No, you're right. So what I'm saying is this is the place where you define your dependencies, and then on your controller, what he's talking about is how is Angular actually looking at these
That's
dependencies?
not what I'm talking about. There's actually a way to do lazy loading in Angular.
Yes.
When you define the route, if you do a resolve and you pass it a function, you can pass it, and you can tell it what you know, when you go to a particular route that you want to load a particular JavaScript file.
Exactly. That's what
Right.
I'm saying. So as part of your state configuration, so we have let's
This
take
is
for an example.
skipping like all of that. I've never seen this before.
That's what I'm saying. So these are I'm just showing you what it does. But in essence, when you want to use these dependencies, there is a state parameter that you attach to your state configuration, which goes over here.
There must have been some way you did it.
So in your state configuration, you add another parameter called resolve. And in your resolve, you give the
Right.
key where you
Right.
added.
Right, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So how you do it the same way with this?
Exactly. So there's another parameter that you attach to each of these states. So let's say, for example, in client, I need a plot library. Plot
Right.
is a charting library, right?
Right.
So I need to show some chart. So I'll do something like this. I'll go here and I'll say resolve, and then I'll pass a function.
Right, that's what I was looking for.
Okay. So I didn't have the sample code for that because I'm not using any of those dependencies, but I just wanted to cover it.
Okay.
But basically, you pass a function, and then you pass the services. So the keys, whatever you have defined in your lazy load file, the keys you pass it to that function, and then
So
it
you
will be
can
a
pass just that.
Yes, you
that
just pass the
key,
fun-
you don't have to pass all the big long.
Yeah, you just pass the keys, and then you can deal with them there.
All right.
So we saw about the various things that Angular is good at, but normally one caveat that's part of the design is Angular allows you to do nested scopes. Like anytime you create a controller and then you attach a scope property to that, right? JavaScript as a language uses prototypal inheritance, which means anytime you create an object and then the object has a prototypal chain, and then when you create a new object, keeping this object as a template, the child object sort of gets all the methods and properties in the prototypal chain of your parent object. So this same behavior is passed on to AngularJS as well. And what happens is, when you have a controller, like we saw that this whole dashboard.html is being controlled by dashboard controller, right? Now internally, let's say I go here and then I have a child controller here that says so this is totally possible in Angular. But what happens is your document controller now also has access to all your scope variables that you have defined in your parent dashboard controller. So this is where you have to be careful, because as you can see, the dashboard.document that is here, now this is going to list all your parents, the value in the parent scope. But within this document controller, if you can still change this, but if you update this, it will also update your parent scope. So you have to be careful in scenarios like this. So that is one caveat, because I've seen a lot of people when they come in new. This is a very powerful approach as well. But in general, it would do good if you try to eliminate nested scopes as much as possible and use it whenever it's required. And then there's two functions that there's two services that Angular provides, which is broadcast and emit. Broadcast passes your so anytime you do something, you can make sure you create an event, and then the rest of your application, they can listen on that event, and then they can do some action. So in order to do this, you use broadcast as well as emit. So broadcast will propagate your event chain upward, while emit will propagate your event chain downward. So let's say you have a controller, we saw dashboard controller, something happens in dashboard controller, and I want to, like, let's say, so let's say something happens and the job increases. I created a new job here. So the job gets incremented, but in some other part of my application, as soon as the job gets incremented, I want something else to happen. So in that case, I will invoke an event, I create an event and pass it down the chain. And any other controllers where it is listening for that particular event, it can immediately invoke its action, and that subsequent action will happen. So broadcast and emit are two powerful properties in Angular that you can use for this approach. But you also have to be sure not to overuse it, because when you really start using broadcast and emit, you can do a lot of things. You can even use it as a workaround for a lot of things that you will otherwise feel difficult to do. But you should make sure that you don't overuse it, because it is going to, you'll have to remember that it is going to propagate across the chain, so you shouldn't overuse it, as it will tend to reduce the efficiency of your application. So I think I pretty much covered some of the like the fundamentals of the Angular as a framework. But still, there are a lot of things that you can use in AngularJS. It's a very powerful framework.
I was wondering about dual authentication. Is there an issue with that?
Adam, can you give me a use case?
Like if I had some services running on one cloud, another RESTful, and I had different authentication methods for each one of those, would there be a problem with?
As long as you deal with, like, because when it comes to two different services, the servers are the ones that are responsible for authenticating the request, right? From your AngularJS application, if one server requires a specific token and the other server requires a specific token, internally from your client side, you can manipulate your each, like I showed you how the interceptors work. So you can intercept the request, and then maybe using a URL segment or something like that, like you can inspect each of the requests, look at the header, and if it is going to one server, you can have one set of authentication headers, and if it's going to a different server, you can have a different set of authentication headers. So that is totally possible. And then in your server, you can handle it that way. So AngularJS in itself doesn't limit the possibility of dealing with multiple servers. In fact, almost any applications that you generally work with as a Spark, you will come across this scenario. One important thing is the parse filter. Like for instance, when you're dealing with cross-domain requests, the major issue would be the parse. So your browser wouldn't allow you to make requests to a third-party domain unless parse is enabled on the server. So you just have to make sure that the for filter is enabled on your server.
So as far as patterns and practices, you just make another helper?
I'm sorry?
As far as patterns and practices in that scenario, you would essentially make another helper on the MVC side of the client?
Yeah. So you don't have to make a separate helper. So what I'm saying is, you can do something like this. Let's see. So as you can see here, I'm intercepting each of the requests, and I'm attaching an authorization header, right? Now in your scenario, you get two servers. Now this config parameter that I'm passing to this function, this has a lot of, it comes, it also has a property called URL. So here you can do something like this. If
I get it now.
right?
Because one would be Azure and one would be AWS.
Right. So you can inspect your header, and then you can make separate calls here.
All right, that makes sense. Thank you.
So that pretty much wraps it about AngularJS client. So the next is Angular 2. So we already, between Angular 1 and Angular 2, there's a major difference. It's like a complete rewrite. One specific difference with Angular 2 is how it deals with the data binding. So I spoke about how in Angular 1, there's a digest cycle, and the digest cycle updates the elements whenever new data comes in. This method, if you think about it, while it's good, it's also sort of inefficient when if you have a huge application and you have multiple variables that need to be updated. Then each time the digest cycle runs, it fires all its water, and then there's a lot of things that you do which can be done in a better way, which is what Angular 2 is primarily focused on. They moved on to a more component-based architecture where you give more emphasis to each individual component. So I've been working with Angular 2 for the past couple of months. It's a really interesting framework. And it also adds the power of TypeScript on top of it. So you can check it out. But if you're already familiar with Angular 1, you can just forget about most of the stuff like things like the controllers, the digest cycle, directives. Most of these things will be completely different in Angular 2. I think they just went with the name, but everything else is quite different. That's the way I thought. So,
I think you've answered every question I have about Angular.
I'm glad. So that's pretty much it. Any questions?
Thank you, Santhosh.